back to Recovery Strategies for Life. We are entering week 18, girls. So last week we discussed the real me and who God created us to be. And I hope that you were able to start recognizing some of those lies and replacing them with God's truth of who you really are. Today, we're going to start looking at eternal perspective. And we're just going to start right off with strategy number 25, which is eternal perspective. So what does that mean, Paula?
Well, there are times when we look at the tangible earthly things like the table and chairs and us, or the situation, the trauma, the damage, versus the eternal perspective, which is where God's coming at it from. Because he sees the value long term. He sees the value in bringing healing into other people's lives. He sees the value up in heaven, eternity, as opposed to just the minute right now that I'm going through, the pain, the damage, the tangible things I see messing up. And so having that viewpoint that is more from God's perspective can help us see our own current situation completely differently.
I had a pastor that used an amazing analogy one time, and he showed us a tapestry, and on the front of the tapestry, it's beautiful, it's gorgeous, there's this picturesque view, and then you turn it around, and then there's all of this mess and strings popping out everywhere and going crisscross all over the place. And it's like, look, this kind of looks like our life, the back. And this whole big mess is what we see. But what God in heaven is creating is this beautiful tapestry on the other side. And we get to see that and how everything interplayed and how it was creating this beautiful plan for our life. But we get to see that later on when we get to heaven. So there's more than what we can actually physically see and physically experience here.
Well, and as we start to see and understand who we are and we can look at it from the eternal perspective, then it decreases that pressure to perform. It decreases the pressure to be a perfectionist. Oh, that was a hard one for me.
Yes. It does make a difference in our value, because if I understand that God has the power, that God's the one guiding things, that I'm just a vessel, then it takes all of that pressure and lifts it back off completely. And I remember at one point I was thinking through a series of circumstances that had gone wrong and had done damage, and it was a whole bunch of stuff right in a row. And I was just like, God, I can't fix this. I can't make things happen. And that night I had a dream. And in it, I was looking up, there had been a tornado or some kind of damage, and I was looking up and it looked like my whole house had just been devastated. And I was like, oh my goodness, God, I've lost everything. It's hopeless. There's no way to rebuild this. It's such a mess. And it was like I suddenly pulled back the viewpoint. And as I pulled back, I realized, oh my goodness, all I was seeing was a little corner of a roof that had been torn off. And when I was up right there in that moment, just looking at that, it was my whole universe that was gone. But when I pulled back, my perspective changed. Then suddenly I realized the whole house was there. There was just one little corner of the roof that had been knocked off, and that was all that needed fixing. But it was all about how I saw it. The damage was no different, whether I thought it was my whole world or if I realized it was just one little thing. But how I felt about it was dramatically different between those two. Have y'all ever felt that?
Yeah, I have that picture of like a zoom lens on a camera, zooming in on, and a lot of times we zoom in on the negative. I know for me, I zoomed in on every negative part of my body and tore that piece up, you know, verbally and sometimes physically with the cutting or with the anorexia. But when I was able to zoom out and start praying and asking God, I want to see myself as you see me, it changed my perspective, and that's that eternal perspective.
Right, and when I realized, oh, it's not up to me to be totally perfect all of the time, and it's not up to me to manage everybody else, and I can just give that to God. That is that idea of performance. I can give that to God. All of that, just kind of push that off. And what that does is it really allows me to, instead of focusing on that and have that pain be everything that not just everything that I see, but everything that I feel. And it just kind of becomes pervasive. Whereas if I am remembering, oh, guess what? This is just a small part of my story, because eternity is a really long time compared to the whatever 80 to or 70 or 80 years that we're supposed to be here. What was it? 80 years, 90 years with Moses, something like that. But comparatively speaking, you know, it's maybe like an inch of my timeline compared to an entire football field of eternity. And that comparison is really what reminds me of, oh, okay, this pain is okay. And that I can get through this because I know that there's something better on the other side. And the song Blessings, I think it's called, by Laura Story, says, what if our greatest disappointments are the achings of this life? Yeah. What if this is the worst of everything? What if anything that I experience here is the worst I'll ever experience? Because in heaven, every tear is going to be taken away, right? We're not going to have that anymore. It's going to be completely different. So if this is the worst that it could possibly be, then I can wait it out for heaven.
Absolutely. It makes this time on earth seem so much shorter when we start looking at it from the eternal perspective.
Well, and understanding that we're not stuck even here on earth. And realizing where I'm at today and where I was 10 years ago is totally different. If I had thought that that was all of it, which at the time in that pain, that was my perspective.
Right.
It was right then in that moment. And I couldn't get out of that or past it. That's why I felt suicidal. That's why I had that rock bottom place. Yeah. But as I went to God for healing, as I went and had intervention in my life and started this journey towards healing, then my perspective continuously changed till I could actually see that that was a horribly dark moment in my life. But the next time I had something that was that bad come up, I had done 3 years worth of healing, active healing. And at that point, I saw that darkness, I saw that hole, I saw that place that just wanted to suck me under. But now I had some perspective. I knew healing was possible. And so instead of going to that darkest, most horrible place, I was able to grasp onto God and hope that yes, this is excruciating, but it's not the end of my story.
Right. It increases that hope
Absolutely.
that you have for the future. It grows every time. Oh, I've been through something that feels like this before. I can get through this again. And this doesn't have to be my story forever because there is the other side. But I know that even in this time, every time now that I have a new trauma trigger, if you want to call it, right? A trigger that comes up and this is a new thing that I've now got to work on. It's not despair that, oh, now I've got something else and it's horrible. Instead, I'm going, oh, this is a new area that I can heal. Right. And I'm already seeing I know what God wants to do with this. I know that there's more hope for my future, even more freedom and more joy than I'm experiencing or have experienced in the past.
Well, and it increases our tolerance to love others. Because for me, it was that forgiveness part that I went through with one of my perpetrators, that I can physically tolerate, emotionally tolerate being in that room with him, and not, and then recognizing too that our fight is not against flesh and blood.
Right.
You know, we've talked about this in Ephesians 6, that we wrestle not against flesh and blood. And I have to go back to that very often, especially when I feel like the enemy is coming at me with the lies that, so-and-so doesn't like me, or they think they're dismissing me or whatever. But it's not them that I get frustrated and angry at. And I have a righteous anger towards the enemy, and I can get frustrated and angry at him because that's who I'm fighting against. And then I can suit up and be ready for the battle.
Well, and that way we can forgive and love the people.
Yeah.
It's so much easier to forgive somebody if you understand from an eternal perspective that Christ died on the cross for each one of us. And it's the sin and the damage and those lies that twist things up and make people do harm.
Yeah.
But that's not the core identity of the person. Hurt people hurt people.
Right.
And so the harm that's been done to people that then they project on and perpetuate and hurt other people, I never had the perpetrators come and say, oh, I'm so sorry, I really hurt you and messed you up. I didn't have that, but I did have the ability to say, okay, God, I can let this go because I can trust you in the eternal scheme of things. You died on the cross for all of us. I don't need to hold on to the bitterness and the anger and all of that ugliness inside of me and be a prisoner in my own bitterness. I can let that go knowing that you are just and that you will do the right things and that you can redeem me and free me in this moment No matter what they choose, no matter what path they go on, no matter what has influenced them to do the ugly, harmful things, I deserve freedom and joy and
Yes.
healing, right?
Absolutely. And for me, I think that there are also some things that I had to look at as far as what was good in my life, what I considered to be good, and then what I considered to be bad. And early on in my walk, I would have said anything that causes pain was bad. And just automatically just got put under that that label of bad. But once I had gone through my DUI, and I recognized that now I had to deal with alcoholism in my life, and I had to start to recover from this, I immediately thought this was a bad thing. This was punishment. This was awful. And then I began to realize, as I got more and more recovery, more and more freedom, that this was actually a good thing in my life. And now I consider it to be one of the best things that has ever happened to me, where at the time it felt very painful and very foreign and shameful. But because of that, I've been able to completely change my life, completely change my perspective. I have a ministry. What? Because of a DUI, which everyone would say, oh, now you're a criminal, this is on your record, this is a terrible thing. But God has used that. And so I've had to kind of reframe what is good in God's eyes versus what is good to human eyes.
I remember there's too much ugliness for you to ever use me in ministry or for your kingdom. And God said, no, that pile of fertilizer that's built up from your past, that mountain of mess, that is actually going to be the thing that catches fire and is your light on a hill. And I have a chapter about that in the book that talks about my light on a hill. And instead of it being a pristine lighthouse and it being so polished and beautiful and white and glowing and picturesque, that my light on a hill was going to be that brokenness and that ugly, stinky, messy stuff that was going to actually bring God glory, because I'd be able to demonstrate to other people how He can come in and heal and restore and bring life into areas that are so broken and ugly. And if I was all pristine and put together, then I couldn't have that testimony that has helped so many people see that in their journey, in their ugliness, with their pile of fertilizer, that they can use that to bloom, right? We talk about using the fertilizer of your past to bloom today. That's a fun quote we use, but it's serious when you look at it in God's economy, that He sees that redemptive, the beauty that comes out of ashes.
And it's really weird that fertilizer, when lit on fire, it burns more beautiful than a lighthouse even does.
Well, it does. It's rainbow colors.
It does.
It's
so
really
cool.
You should try it.
Wow, don't try this at home, children. Make sure
No
you
children.
sure you got some water nearby and try this outdoors.
We did it in chemistry class, actually, and saw how that looked, and the phosphorus and stuff in the fertilizer actually burns beautiful rainbow colors. But it was just God again showing that His perspective is just so much different than ours and our own human brokenness. Like you being born without that hand.
Oops.
That would be like this devastating
could be.
thing. But in the way God's blessed you and the perspective He's given you,
Right.
watching you live life out when a lot of things are a lot harder.
Right.
But watching you live it out with joy and humor and life and just such a different perspective, it reminds me again how our perspective changes everything.
Right. It could be, I could be, oh, poor me. I'm lacking. I'm without. God made me less than. No, he put a stamp on my life that is a physical reminder for me that He made me specifically.
God can just bring miraculous good out of the things that in our human perspective we just think are the end of everything.
Yeah, the end of everything.
Isn't that how we look at it so many
Yes.
times?
Yes. And my understanding of what is bad has certainly, like I said, the good and the bad, or the good and the evil, has changed so much so because we talked about the surrender. And we keep talking about the surrender and why it's so important. And if I am not surrendering to Him and I'm going off and I'm saying, oh, I want to do a ministry for, and walk off in the other direction, the opposite direction from where he wants me to go. That's going to be sin, and that's actually, even though I think, oh, I'm going to help all of these people. So if I decided that I was going to help amputees, you know what? That's a great cause. That's a great thing, and I could definitely bring some life into that. But if that's not where God wants me to go,
Right.
then that's going to be sin, and that is actually going to be something in the bad category, the evil category, that is not going to bring life, because what I'm going to do is bring my own effort into that, my striving, my trying, and it's not going to be from the Holy Spirit bringing life. And that so that perspective of good and evil, sin, not sin, totally changes from just the good of the world versus the good of what God's plan is.
Well, and I could have stayed in my really good job that was stable and brought in the income, but that would have been me disobeying what God was asking of me.
Right.
And I was hit with a lot of adversity from certain people when I shared, hey, guess what? I'm moving, because it did seem really quick, and people were concerned. But the ones that were willing to sit down and meet with me and hear my heart and how God was prompting and how the Holy Spirit was moving,
Yeah.
totally got on board and backed me in every aspect of it. And they get to now see and watch how God is putting all of those pieces into place. Mm-hmm. But who knows what would have happened if I would have stayed where I was at and just been content, because what I had was good.
Mm-hmm. Right.
But it wasn't God's best.
Right.
And his eternal best is right this minute, you sitting here sharing life and hope and healing, using the education that God's had you get, and using the experience you've had, and using your story to speak life and hope to everybody that's watching this and that is seeing what's possible and what God does, because there are blessings that come out of it. And one perspective that I realized I needed to shift was, I kept looking at things from that good versus evil, is this good or not? And you go to different people, different churches, different denominations, different Christians, and oh, that's bad. No, this is good. No, that's okay. You can drink, you can not drink, you can wear these clothes. No, you shouldn't ever wear those clothes. You can date, you shouldn't date. You could, there's all of this confusion. And I was like, oh my goodness, this is crazy.
Yeah.
Because I can't get anything solid. Right. And I was talking to God about that one day, and he reminded me of the original choice in the Garden of Eden. And he had two important trees in that garden. They could eat of anything there. He only told them not to eat of one. And the temptation was that they were missing out on something. And that, well, don't you want to be wise? Don't you want to know good and evil? And they said, yes, we want to know. We don't know something, we want to know. So they bought into that, and then their eyes were opened, and next thing you know, they're ashamed and hiding, and they can't be naked without shame anymore, and this whole mess. And God just showed me, you know what, Paula? The good and the evil on that tree were both death. He said, if you eat of the tree, any part of it, it brings death, because what I have for you instead is a tree of life. And they weren't sitting there going and eating all the tree of life. In fact, they got kicked out of the garden and didn't get to be there anymore, because once they had their own choice, instead of trusting God about what's good and evil, they were going to decide what was good and evil. And God's like, I can't have them live forever. When they're the ones trying to be gods in their own eyes. So he kicked them out of the garden, and they didn't get to eat the tree of life anymore. And I went, oh, I've been sitting there jumping back and forth between what's good, what's bad, what's okay, what's not okay, in my own judgment, doing what was right in my own eyes, or what other people thought, trying to people please and perfectionism and all that mess, instead of going, God, I trust you to decide what's good, what's evil in your eyes and your perspective, and for me to be focusing on choosing the tree of life.
Wow.
And that shifted a lot of things, and I started getting an increase in opportunity, an increase in blessings, an increase in change, because he had all those things on the path that obedience to him had me walking down, which has currently today, right now, gotten us to this table, sitting here talking, talking to all of y'all about how our perspective affects our choices and our ability to choose in that way.
And we joke sometimes about, if it's God's will, then it's his bill, or if it's God's vision, it's his provision. And one of the craziest things, when I did my taxes this year, and I'm looking and how God had asked me to increase my giving last year, and I did, and But if I would have known mid-year last year that I was going to be moving at the end of the year, I would have been saving and hoarding that money. But he was like, no, give it. And then here I, do my taxes, and I'm like, this math doesn't add up. Like, I'm really good at math, but this does not make sense. But God says that if you seek ye first the kingdom of heaven, that all of these things are going to be added unto you. And part of that has been that financial provision. Yes, I left the job, I left the benefits, I left the retirement plan. But God's retirement plan can be so much better than that I had in a school district.
And we get to see how the miraculous comes into play.
Yeah.
When we switch from our own strength and our own capacity and start trusting him with it, because on his path there is provision, there are miracles, that's the only way we're here doing this, is because he has provided miraculously. He has prompted people to give and support and help in ways we never could have made happen. I mean, a single mom with 3 kids and almost no income coming in, no regular job, no steady paycheck. It takes miracles and provision every day for me to just do the next basic human thing in this place. And he doesn't keep us there. He keeps us with his provision, and I get to benefit from that. And I've watched you ladies benefit from the things that don't make sense in human tangible understanding.
They really don't.
No, at all.
Well, and he could have given us the money or, whatever the resources we needed to produce or do whatever the next project is for the ministry, whatever ministry we're working in. But that also doesn't allow for others to be obedient and step into that and give the way that God wants them to be a part of it. And I got to witness that going on a mission trip to Cambodia and having other people pour in. I had the money and God said no. I'm like, what? Like, I have it. And he was like, no. Okay, God, I have the money. Why are you telling me no? And at the last minute, in the last hours, God has put it on somebody else's heart to give in that. And that individual now, like, I can just see her beaming with joy of being able to provide that and to be a blessing to me and a blessing to the girls that I worked with in Cambodia, that if I would have just said, oh, here's the money, and just threw it out there flippantly, I would have robbed her of that blessing.
Well, and you wouldn't have had that money then to do the other things that God asked you to do, in not having the job and still having to pay bills and expenses, where you were planting that provision in a different way, which that's how his economy works, is he is the one that provides and does that. But it's not just in money or resources, it's not just in talent or the use of or the good that he brings, it's also in protection. We've discussed that fact, that when we are sitting there focusing on choosing life and choosing him and choosing obedience, that we have the ability to have him step in supernatural protection, to surround us with his armies, with his angels, to block the things that could have done us so much harm, the accidents. So when we're driving on these trips to conventions and different things, and there's just, I don't know how we miss. I don't know how we didn't have massive, horrible wrecks on different occasions, because cars were just coming at us, except for God. Just, I swear, there's just something there blocking where we've been able to continue that path, because in obedience, he's been the one protecting, and we can't fabricate that for ourselves. I can't protect myself. I can't protect my kids that way.
And that's something even out of the Old Testament, this practical tool of the Israelites, when they were surrendering to God and when they were being obedient in what God had given them to do, and they were worshiping him as God, then they were under his protection. And when opposing armies came against them, they didn't even need to, lift their swords sometimes. We talked about the worshipers going first, and with Gideon, never lifted a sword, but,
Jericho, the walls just crashed down, right?
Falling down, and none of the things that God asked the Israelites to do looked like the best thing to do. It didn't look like it was going to be safe. It didn't look like there was any common sense associated with this. But he was actually showing them the right path where they would be protected and they wouldn't be harmed. It's just, we need to be stepping out in faith, and as we do that and we see that protection come around, then that even increases our faith even more, because we see how he really is providing for us and protecting us.
and then we get the eternal rewards. Because I could have stayed where I was at in this good job, but God said, nope, I have this is my best over here for you, and now your voice is being heard among the nations and the world. You know, he took me and my voice all the way to Cambodia to speak live. Those are opportunities that I would have missed out if I would have just stayed in that place of being content. And the eternal reward is, I don't know exactly what's going to end up happening, and I might not ever see the harvest here on earth.
Right.
But I know that one day I'm going to get to see the eternal rewards of the fruits of the labor that I did do here and in my obedience to him.
Right, so at the end of this, when we're talking about eternal perspective, there are so many ways and places where having that mindset of looking at God's perspective, at God's purpose, at God's vision, at God being the one that is in control and being God, and we don't have to be, we've talked about that, but when we start looking at things from that perspective and the fact that there's eternal value that's totally beyond anything we have here, it lessens the pain because we're not stuck in this place. There's an eternal reward. It lessens our fear, our performance, our need to fix and do, our need to make our own provision, to fix our own things, to protect ourselves. It gives us the opportunity to recognize that we can trust God with all of that, and it makes today so much more manageable. I don't have to take thought for tomorrow. I can stay in today. I can give all of the hardships and the difficulties and things to God. And it doesn't mean that everything is magically easy or fixed in today's world, but it means that that's not all there is. I have the opportunity to look beyond that to God's eternal value system and heaven as a place where there are no tears and there is no damage. And with all of that, it gives us the courage and encouragement we need to walk through today, even with its hardships, and to know that at the end of the day, at the end of our life, at the end of God's plan, God does win and things are good, and he does heal and restore, and we get to see it here on earth in a lot of ways, but for sure, we know that we get to see it in eternity.
We hope that you have a great and a blessed week.